You have problems, and I can tell what your problems are by your books. Wow, that was a strong start, right? That was a lot, but it's true. At least it's true for me, because I think if you read my writing, you can tell what I'm going through. I think that's true for a lot of people, personally. I want to encourage you to take a good, deep look at your writing and figure out if there is a core conflict or a core theme in all of it. Because I think for a lot of us, it's present. When you look at a lot of famous storytellers, you can see what scares them, what worries them. You can see their fears, their concerns. I'm gonna talk about George Lucas for a minute, because George Lucas was revolutionary in a lot of ways. He did not like being part of the studio system. He did not like that the studios had all this control over movies. He'd run into a lot of problems when he made THX 1138, and especially when he made American Graffiti. He dealt with studios, and they were a big problem for him. He didn't like that they were the gatekeepers, that they were basically dictating who could and couldn't make movies. There were a whole bunch of people who felt this way. A lot of them banded together and made a company called American Zoetrope, which did not last super long. It's a fascinating story, and I absolutely suggest you watch the documentary about American Zoetrope because it's so interesting. But it was these people who were these scrappy underdogs that happened to include some very, very famous names like Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas. People who wanted to find an alternative to the studio system. As you can tell by looking around and figuring out that everything is owned by 3 companies, they did not succeed, at least not entirely. And George Lucas is an especially interesting case because he made a couple pretty successful movies you may have heard of for 20th Century Fox. Then he didn't work as a director for a couple of decades. And then he made a couple more pretty successful, if not critically well received, films again for 20th Century Fox. Then he sold his company to Disney and moved on. And what's so interesting about that is that each of his 2 trilogies embody the struggles he was having with the studio system. His first film trilogy, the Star Wars trilogy, is about a bunch of scrappy underdogs trying to take on this monolithic empire. And it doesn't always go super well. You know, they manage to beat him at the end, but that's because it's based on the hero's journey and it's got a lot of influences. We can talk about influences in last week's video. But there's a bunch of moments where it does not seem like this is going to be possible. And when you look at books about that time, they call it things like the digital revolution and the underdogs, and these people refer to themselves the same way that the rebels in Star Wars do, because it's 1-to-1. The rebels in Star Wars represent Lucas and his filmmaker friends trying to find a way to beat the studio system. I mean, they represent other things too. They represent the American government, and the rebels represent the Viet Cong. Like, there were other things going on in that film as well. But, you know, Luke Skywalker, Lucas, George Lucas, like, he spelled it out for us. It's about him. It's about his stuff. It's about his struggle. And then he spent a couple of decades making technology better, making a lot of advances in filmmaking. He was very successful at that point. He had a lot of fame and a lot of money. And everyone around him just said, yes, do whatever you want. No questions, no notes. And we got his second Star Wars trilogy, which isn't very good. I mean, it's got a lot of good stuff in it, but, like, the script is bad, and, like, the filmmaking is bad. Like, he's not a good director, and he's not a good writer, and he wrote and directed those movies, and they're not very good because of it. He was too big to fail. He had become the empire, and by the time those movies come out, everything around him, all of the narrative, all of the documentaries, all of the articles, they all refer to him the way the characters refer to Darth Vader. He has an empire. He is unquestioned. He doesn't have anyone saying no to him. He has all the money. He has all the authority. He can't be stopped. He's too big to fail. Empire of Dreams is the name of the documentary about the first 6 Star Wars movie, and they named it after the bad guys. It's about his journey making Star Wars, and they named it after the bad guys. Again, it's spelled out for us at this point. He had become his villain. Everything he'd been worried about, everything he'd been struggling with, he put into his story. There's other things as well. Again, he makes reference to American politics. When we get to Revenge of the Sith, there's the line, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy, and a lot of people realize that he was criticizing the Bush administration, the if you're not with us, you're against us mentality. He had a lot of problems with. We don't think of George Lucas as that political a guy, but he was putting it in his fiction. He was telling us that the tactics that are being used by the Americans in the 70s and in the 2000s are what the bad guys do. And I don't have like a psychiatry degree or anything, but this stuff's pretty obvious if you just take the time and look at what he struggles with in his writing. I think that's true of us too, including you and including me for sure. I've done a video about theme before, but one of the core themes of my writing is old versus new. It's people who prefer the world the way that they know it, who want to keep it a certain way, who want to bring things back to when things were great before now, when things weren't now before now, and people who think that the world should push forward and be different from then and different from now and maybe kind of better and not regressive. Those themes play a huge role in my writing. Another big influence on my writing is in-groups and out-groups. I'm really interested in the gatekeeping and the divides that we put up against each other. I mean, the Wizard novel was all about that. The superhero novel is all about who gets to be a hero and who doesn't. And that's an element that needs to come back in my revisions. I should really keep working on my revisions. I need to do some writing, y'all. These are things that matter to me because they're things that interest me. You know, nature versus nurture is a big question in the superhero novel, not based on the universe, but based on the characters. Like, the characters debate that kind of thing. Some people think that it doesn't matter, and some people do. Some people think that you can't escape your heritage or whatever, and other people don't think that matters at all. And that's a major source of conflict in the story, because that's something I look around at the world and I see people conflicting over. I see people using nature versus nurture as a way to keep people out, as a way to basically say, you get to be a part of this because of who you are, and who you are is determined by who you were and who your family was. Anytime people in power can use that as an opportunity to exclude, they will do it. And that's very present in my writing, because I think it's present in the world when I look around. And that's something that I am struggling with. I'm struggling with seeing the world do that to people and wanting to figure out how it can stop. So it's in my books, because it matters to me. What about you? What are you wrestling with? What are you thinking about? I think you might find out that there's some things that are weighing on you because you put them in your fiction. You may not have realized you're doing it, but I think a lot of people do this. Take a look at your writing. Take a few minutes and think, what anxieties about the world am I putting into my story? What questions about myself have I put into my story? What does the world building in my stories convey about my feelings about religion or politics or gender or sexuality? Maybe in ways that I'm not even realizing. It's healthy for us to take a moment and self-assess and figure out what we're saying without realizing we're saying it. Your readers will figure it out if you don't. And you may as well figure out what you're saying now, because it's going to make you sound much smarter when you talk about your book. And I think it's going to help you to know that these are things that are on your mind, so much so that they've made it into your writing. It can only be healthy. That's the video. Please leave me a comment if you have any thoughts on this. I think this is a meaty subject and I would love us to get into this. Hit the like button if you like the video. If you do, I'll probably make more like it. Please subscribe. I'm trying to reach 200 subscribers by the end of March. If you like my videos, you should ring the bell. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, Victoria.